I think I'm going to drop this entire conversation at the end of our pod.
Fun.
We have really fun spoiler-free discussion of Honora, Sean Baker, Mikey Madison, and just crap happening in the film world. Little Japanese horror cinema thrown in there. Anyway,
I mean, I didn't even get to tie a bow on how, like, you mentioned the election and how I'm probably going to go see Juror Number 2 tomorrow night as a salve. Also, apparently Sean Baker's politics kind of suck if you track his Twitter likes about some of the things that he's liked. So, we contain multitudes, as do these 8 teams who are officially in the NWSL playoff bracket.
Oh my God. All right, let's get on with the show. Hello, and welcome to Expected Own Goals Playoffs edition. I am so excited for this. Evan, how are you?
I'm doing fine. I think that unless anything's really changed for you, it hasn't changed for me over the last week, that the XOG Derby is in play for the championship, Gotham versus Kansas City, because there's no reseeding after each round. So there's a hard bracket on each side, and they are on opposite sides. So that should be interesting. I mean, I think those are the two favorites, even if you like Gotham and I like KC more. And that's exactly the kind of final I would like to see, with all respect to the Gotham-Seattle final, which they were not the two best teams of 2023 squaring off against each other.
Be a fair statement.
So, I mean, bring it on.
Let's just crack on and crack into this. We just suffered one of the least interesting NWSL weekends. I don't even think worthy of a whip around.
No, it's not. I mean, I think we were marveling at how there were 2 utterly meaningless games on the penultimate weekend of the season. This week, it turned out that technically there were only 2 meaningless games, but really we can throw Chicago and Kansas City into the mix there and make it 3. And it's just, I even went back and checked. It's has there ever been a final weekend where there was more than one game that didn't have any kind of stakes, playoff implications, seeding implications, anything, shield implications? And there isn't. This is the first time that's ever happened. And it's really unfortunate because, again, San Diego, Louisville, and even Chicago, Kansas City, the way that game was played with Kansas City just sort of just stop. They just decided to stop playing in the second half. None of those results would have mattered. KC could have lost that game and they still would have been 4th and still would have hosted North Carolina in the quarterfinal. Louisville had, their playoff fates were in the balance until about 9:15 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday night, which is many, many hours before they played. And so that game ended up not being particularly interesting. And think about it, if there had been a proper decision day, and if the fucking Snapdragon Field Michigas had occurred, and that game ended up being played in Louisville, that would have been fucked, because then all of a sudden Louisville would be getting home field advantage in a game where they really wanted to win. But B, just think about the energy inside Lynn Family Stadium with all of that chaos that had happened in the 48 hours previously, to all of a sudden have this extra home game where you have to get a really strong result, and at the same time you're playing a bunch of other teams have to have certain results go a certain way. And I mean, I just think that it would have been incredible drama. And the reason it doesn't happen is because we have these 4 media partners that have to share the wealth of the final day of the season. And so everything gets spread out. But what you lose, as we talked about last week, is it ends up becoming accidentally anti-competitive. And Sunday just was so lame. Sunday was really lame. As fun as it was for KC to beat Chicago up in the first half, whatever, it ultimately didn't matter. And anyone getting excited about KC's chances in the playoffs, I agree with you, but the evidence shouldn't be that game with a depleted Chicago squad in a game where even if you'd lost, it wouldn't have mattered. So it was just a drag to have the season, what has been an incredible season, go out like that. So we need the playoffs to have some juice.
What I will say is, generally speaking, having all of these media partners has been nothing short of a boon the entire way through the season, until we got to the final weekend.
Yeah.
At which point, all of these media partners need to understand the value of a decision day and the value of splitting parts.
Yeah.
I hope this is something the league corrects for next season.
It's hard though, because there is, ESPN's got college football on Saturdays and CBS has the NFL on Sundays. And so how do you balance all of those priorities to get them all on the same day of the week, Maybe there's a way to do it. I just think it's a difficult challenge. It's a challenge that the league needs to take on and needs to work with Scripps and Disney and Amazon and Viacom or Paramount to figure something out, but it's hard. It's a hard thing to do.
I felt like effectively, if it wasn't over Friday night was a harbinger of things to come.
Yep.
Portland pantsed Angel City, who couldn't have cared less. They allowed Christine Sinclair one of the softest goals you'll see this season.
Yeah, I know.
Which I thought was kind.
Yeah.
Gotham Esther padded her stats heading into the playoffs.
Yep. A brace against a Utah team that didn't care either.
Yeah. Rachel Kundananji ran roughshod over Houston in a game that had some meaning.
Yeah.
But for a player who was like potentially a scratch going into the weekend, boy, she showed up big time and makes me feel really great about our selection of her as a top 5 MVP.
But that game is also a reminder with Penelope Hawking on the bench to start things out that they knew also like, if we draw this game, whatever. Like they had a couple of snafus and like let Houston back into it at a couple of moments, but they also knew it's like, all right, as long as we don't lose, we're fine.
And also for the Patreon hardcores, this. Neither of us got the final standings exactly right. We both got the bottom half right. We both had Portland 6, Bay 7, Chicago 8. But I think you had Kansas City 2.
Yeah, I did.
And I had Kansas City 3.
Yep.
And Kansas City ended up 4, which I think actually brings us to a good place to begin in our playoff discussion.
Well, first, I actually would like to maybe take stock of the season a little bit.
Let's do this. Are there teams that have missed the playoffs that you would like to pour one out for right now?
Yeah, Louisville, I think.
Let's pour one out for Louisville.
Even after all the problems that Louisville dealt with, many of them self-inflicted, they still probably were in an 8-team playoff field in a 14-team league. They still were probably playoff worthy. Expected points basically has them at about 33, and that would put them in 8th spot.
7th spot.
Well,
above North Carolina.
Yeah, I'm
like on expected points.
I'm removing Angel City from this equation.
Okay, sure.
So that is a shame. San Diego as well. I think that we've talked about it, that their at least offensive resurgence under Landon Donovan and Delphine Cascarino was really something to see. And bodes well, at least for that part of the field going into next year. And because things were so tight from like 5th to 11th or 5th to 10th or so on expected points, like they reasonably could have been, they ended up finishing 6th by that measure. They could have been a playoff team. Now, this is not to say that San Diego or Louisville would have like deserved to win it all or get to the final or anything, but like in this expanded pool, I think those are two teams that have played well enough that seeing them in the postseason would have been nice, especially for Louisville, who have had just this weird 9th place curse for 3 straight years. If there's any team that probably didn't deserve it, it's Chicago, because Chicago, at the end of the day, has the worst points per game, expected points per game, non-penalty XG differential per game of any playoff team in league history. And it showed when they got slapped around by Kansas City on Sunday and could have finished the weekend in 6th, ended up in 8th, and do not seem like they are going to pose much of a challenge for Orlando in the first round. And so Chicago can be happy that they're in the dance, but of the 8 teams who are there, they are the one that probably can't take too much comfort from that fact and have a lot of work to do for next year. Yeah,
I would describe them as which one not like the other.
Yeah.
For the playoff teams that have made
That's
it.
right.
Let's do this. Let's give letter grades and quick explanations for the 6 teams that missed the playoff. Just like we'll do a greater diagnosis, but I just want the snap judgment right now without having like poured over everything or like done deep analysis. Let's go bottom of the table up. I want to hear sort of a letter grade based on your expectation of where you thought this team, of sort of how you think the team should see itself.
Mm-hmm.
So who finished dead last?
Houston.
1 second. Yeah, of course they did. So from bottom of the table, the Houston Dash, give me a letter grade.
They're the only ones who I would fail here. They're the only ones who earn an F. Yep. They're doing what Houston always does. Horrible organization, horrible planning. Whatever happened with Fran Alonso behind the scenes was a disaster. To what extent Alex Singer is responsible for any of this, I think is open to debate, but firing her and then never even installing an interim GM, one who might have been useful to like get you through the summer transfer window, that not happening is pretty pathetic. And I don't see any hope for them come next year unless Ted Siegel and Jess O'Neill all of a sudden, gain like 90 IQ points in this regard. And I just don't see that happening. So they are the only failing grade here. They made bad trades. They got a great deal in Paige Nielsen and then did nothing with it. Bringing Tarsiane in, same deal. Signing Ramona Bachmann and Ellen Rubinson was a waste of money. Losing Maria Sanchez. Clearly, it seems like it was the fault of the organization that you lost Maria Sanchez in the first place was stupid. Just really, really lame and pretty pathetic all around.
I actually don't hate necessarily what happened in the Maria Sanchez isolated moment, and I don't hate some of the young draft picks that they brought in. But yeah, it's a failing grade for me as well. It's an F. And that's really parsing. It's just like whether it's an F with a 59 or whether it's an F with a 30.
Yeah. Also, the Maria Sanchez deal looks better if, you use both that money and those assets to actually like make a playoff run, for example, which you didn't do.
Totally. Again, I think you lose a coach, you lose a GM, you have no plan.
Yeah. And replace neither.
The Houston Dash. These are dark days, and if you are a Dash fan,
I'm sorry for you.
Our hearts go out to you because you deserve better.
Yeah.
So yeah, Houston Dash F. Seattle Reign, give me a letter grade. Oh, I can start us off.
Why don't you start? Because it's not going to be good, but
I'm giving Seattle a D.
Yeah, I think that's right.
To go from a somewhat fluky run to the NWSL final last year to 13th in the table is a precipitous fall, but so many of the choices along the way, and it all stems from the slow sail to the Carlisle group and essentially chalking the season off as a lost season, but not replacing the huge hole or acknowledging the age curve of your team and reinforcing that with so many of the acquisitions you made during the season. I think the Reign did themselves multi-year damage this season, and frankly last season. But last season there was quality to cover for that damage, and this season that damage was laid bare.
I think that this offseason is going to be very interesting for them because can they convince free agents, trade targets, international transfers that 2024 was blip, that it was just a fluke, and that the ship is getting righted again. That will be how they perform in the off season this winter. I think is going to be very telling about how quickly they can rebound from this. Yeah. But I think a D is right. Like their hands were largely tied behind their backs because Michelle King and the Carlisle group were jumping through a lot of hoops that dragged the sail out. But Leslie Gallimore and Laura Harvey probably could have been smarter about how they handled
Michelle King.
Well, because she owned OL Group, so she technically owned the Reign for a second, and she was the one who sold it to Carlisle Group. So Leslie Gallimore and Laura Harvey, could they have been smarter with their talent acquisition and how they put the team together in the short term? Yeah, probably. So the results showed probably not as bad as their record, but definitely not playoff caliber team. And so, yeah, I think a D is right.
The Reign's leading scorer this season, Bethany Balser, is not a Reign player.
I know.
It's just bad.
Yeah.
It's just Alana Cook, no longer a Reign player. A lot of the pieces that you really would have been excited about at the beginning of the season are no longer pieces in the team.
Yeah.
It's bad. That said, I think that there are more hopeful signs there in Seattle than there are in Houston.
Definitely.
I don't think it's worthy of a failing grade. I even think Laura Harvey probably survives this and fights to live another day. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
All right.
It's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah.
It's just not necessarily a bad thing. All right, we're moving on. Utah Royals, give me a letter grade.
Oh, Angel City's 12th.
Technically, Angel City is 12th because of points deduction.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Angel City 12th. Actually, give me a letter grade for Angel City.
D-.
Yeah, I'm actually going to give Angel City an F here, too.
I think that's fair.
If you get a points deduction for breaking salary cap rules on the back of a season where you eked into the playoffs and you hop from a 6th place finish to a 12th place finish, and then you go, there are just very few front office choices that I look at that Angel City made that I can say were definitively good ones.
None. I mean, between running over the salary cap for a month and then getting penalized for it, and then also having to dive out of contracts from 2 of your best defensive players in order to make sure that you don't get fucked on the salary cap again when Kristen Press came back, left the team hamstrung from the beginning. It was shambolic. We don't need to reiterate a lot of the things that we've said all season. It's an organization running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Looking toward the future, I maybe don't give an F just because there were some good games after the Olympics break.
True.
And not just on results, but on performances as well. You know, Sydney LaRue finally got benched. We saw Messiah Bright play a lot more. I was happy about that. And there's a young core and a brand new ownership group. And Angela Hucles-Mangano and Julie Ehrman are no longer calling the shots. So I know everybody is very worried about the LaRue contract, and I agree. It just feels to me like that was a deal that Ehrman and Hucles-Mangano were closing and just couldn't announce before their suspensions. So I don't know if I hang that on Willow Bay totally, but we don't know. Again, this offseason is going to be very interesting to see if Willow Bay can make a lot of the right calls, both in the front office and at the personnel level.
Yeah, it's not an F for next season. It's an F for this season.
Yeah. But again, there were good games in Angel City's year.
Totally.
Whereas you couldn't say that about Houston, really.
Yeah, I just think that,
Also, a D- is not very good. It's barely a passing grade.
No, we're not. I just think that you get an F if you shoot your own foot off. If you kill your own team's season with a salary cap violation, it is not the players who get an F for this. It is a full look at the franchise itself.
No. Sure.
And I also think it's just like you are spending the goodwill of your fan base.
Yes, rapidly.
Recklessly and rapidly.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Finishing in 11th place, though they should have finished in 12th, but for a points deduction. The Utah Royals. Give me a letter grade.
I think this is a C, maybe a C-.
Yeah.
Just because we've said it, but just what a masterful rebirth after the Olympic break, both in terms of how Kelly Cousins managed the roster in bringing in Claudia Zornoza, Mina Tanaka, and Chloe Lacasse, but also in seemingly having now a head coach in Jimmy Kunratz who seems to know what he's doing. And to what extent it was Cousins or Amy Rodriguez who was driving a lot of the roster decisions in the first half of the year, can't really say, but the decision-making did seem better once Rodriguez was gone. That's all we can really note, that there is some correlation there. Don't know about the causation. Just, I think, really smart, really intelligent. They still were not a great team, but it showed that with just a little bit of savviness, with just a little bit of thought and care, like this team could at the very least be functional. And that's what they were at the end of the day. So I give them a C.
Yeah, I'm going to give them a B-, and it is giving them effectively an F for the Amy Rodriguez section of this season, wherein all of the nightmares that we had imagined for this team from the jump basically came real. They were just as bad as we had feared, just as directionless as we had feared. And I don't think it should escape us that they actually, which so few teams do, cut their losses relatively early in that process, and were able to, in season, find a completely new direction, one that I actually think takes some of their young pieces and gives us hope for the future about them, and now have a core that they can probably bridge a season with toward a better team. I think that I don't think I have seen a team go through as effective a sacking and player acquisition and hiring from the depths that they came from. It's kind of an A for me against my expectations of them once Amy Rodriguez is out of the job. No, I mean, like, if you want to criticize it, it's like, I guess they could have done it faster, but faster would have been,
you really couldn't have,
maybe irresponsible.
Yeah, I mean, they did it a week before the Olympics break, or 2 weeks. Like, it was probably as early as you really could feasibly do it.
They kind of did it at the right time, and by the end of the season, bar that Gotham result, they are playing pretty free-flowing good football.
Yep.
And out of an expansion team, you don't expect good football to begin with, generally speaking.
Interestingly enough, the other expansion team of the year, which we might mention once we get to the playoffs, is Bay did the same thing, just without all the firings, where they just said middle of the season, all right, we got to do something different, and it worked. So, hats off to both expansion teams for being able to have that nimbleness or that flexibility and that self-awareness to pull that off. I mean, at the end of the day, like, Utah finishes 11th. We thought they were going to finish in 14th at the start of the season. So, like, it's not as though they really blew us out of the water here, but the fact that we thought they were going to be historically bad and they ended up being just sort of like a normal version of bad is quite something.
Yeah, it's the ability to course correct mid-season that I think deserves the B-, and that if I'm a Utah Royals fan, I'm actually, like, stoked for next season.
Yeah.
And I think the underlying numbers suggest I should be, like, cautiously optimistic for next season.
Mm-hmm.
And you also know they probably haven't spent to the top of the cap. So, like, there's room for improvement there. Yeah. All right, let's move on and talk San Diego Wave. Give me a letter grade here.
Maybe a C+. I liked the Cascarino signing a lot. That worked for them. It turns out that, like, at least in terms of, like, attacking tactics, Landon Donovan seems to know what he's doing. But the organization as a whole is a fucking disaster. And it is a credit to the players that they were able to put in what ended up being, 6th place worthy performances in the aggregate. So you really do have to credit them for that, while also acknowledging that everything that Jill Ellis touched this year turned to shit. And also, like, Donovan does not seem to be all that interested in, like, developing out of possession tactics. And that could be a problem if he ends up being hired as the permanent head coach.
I mean, that's one where I say give it a little time.
Sure.
But yeah,
but I'm just saying in terms of, like, how they actually turned out under him, like, the attack looked great and the defense still looked pretty shambolic.
Yeah, I'm going to give him a D+ for this year. And it's just against the team that they were last year. The underlying numbers suggest they were nowhere near as bad as their table position suggests. But it is the rot at the core of the Jill Ellis of it all. And, like, even including Angel City, who had some pretty horrendous stuff going on, no team's front office showed greater sort of, like, institutional rot.
Yeah.
And it is a byproduct of how good their on the field performance was often under Casey Stoney, a person who I think was pretty unfairly fired. And then again, with new signings under Landon Donovan in aspects of the game that probably drags this letter grade up for me.
Mm-hmm.
But they went through a sale semi-smoothly. It's just Jill Ellis is a huge problem. And I worry about the future of the San Diego Wave franchise with her having any fingers in the proverbial pie.
Once again, like Seattle, like Angel City, there's a new ownership group that now has full control of the team. So maybe Jill Ellis won't be around that long. Or the Levine-Leichman family will demonstrate what they're really all about and keep her on and allow her to maintain that same level of power. And then you're really fucked. So we'll see.
You know what? I'm going to ding them down to a D, because if you only end up playing 12 home games and 14 road games, you deserve like a partial letter grade knock.
That's true. I'm dropping them down for me to a C- because of the Snapdragon pitch. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like get your shit together.
Which is, weird for me to defend them, at least in some regard, but like they really don't have a lot of control over that field because they are leasing.
San Diego State.
Yeah, it's San Diego State, and it seems very clear that like the ground. Apparently, I didn't know this actually. The grounds crew who mines that pitch like tweeted out some very self-congratulatory messages at the end of the NWSL championship, talking about what a great job they did. And you were at that game, as was I. We saw that pitch. That pitch was not good. So if that's how they see themselves, then it is obvious that it's only going to get worse before it gets better. The one thing that that the Wave may be having in their control is that they are choosing to rent that stadium, but also, where else are they going to go? I mean, Snapdragon gives them the opportunity to put 32,000 in the stands, and they have some of the best home atmospheres in the league. So it's a real damned if you do, damned if you don't, I think, in terms of like how they can handle it. And I would also bet that like their lease is long term, and I bet that San Diego State, because the stadium was brand new, the Wave, people forget, the Wave opened that stadium in September of 2022. I am sure that San Diego State did not sell to them the idea that the field was going to be shit. you know? So I blame San Diego Wave for a lot of things that went wrong. I maybe don't blame them so much for the pitch.
I only can imagine things will get better with the inclusion of now the San Diego men's MLS
I mean,
team.
how long did it take for Addie Field's pitch to get fixed, even though there was a men's team playing there, I
am joking. I wish all of you listeners the confidence of a San Diego grounds crew member, but none of the lack of self-awareness of a San Diego grounds crew member.
Please.
All right. And finally, moving on to Louisville, our final missed playoff team. Give me a letter grade for Louisville.
Yeah, it's maybe a C as well, just because on the one hand, like Ryan Dell really did push his chips into the middle of the table by getting Bethany Balser and Janine Becky at the deadline. They are a team that is chock-a-block with talent, but unlike last year, not even the underlying numbers for the players themselves would indicate that this is like a team that's less than some of its parts. Like it was just like an 8th place team. It was like a pretty good team, not a great team, maybe not even a pretty good team. So, you credit them for going for it, and also crediting Bev Yanez for finally waking up and like playing her best lineups in the final weeks of the season. But then you knock them by questioning why it took Yanez so long to do that and not putting in consistently good performances all year, despite the potential of the players you had. So it feels like a pretty solid C.
Yeah, that's where I'd go with it as well. I think it's hard to give a team a lot higher if they miss the playoffs.
Especially in an expanded field.
Yeah, I think against Louisville's own expectations for the season, this has to be a disappointment. At times, they played some really inspired football. There's a lot of really fun talent there. Losing Carson Pickett probably cost a fair amount down the stretch, kind of out of their control.
Kind of out of their control, and also like it's a calculated risk because you knew you would have the capital to bring a couple of players in, which they did. They didn't just sit on that money,
That said, if you told me at the jump of the season that they would lose Carson Pickett and Jalen Howell and still be a team that I think has good pieces moving forward, I would have been surprised. Taylor Flint has a great shot at making one of our 2 best 11s when we do that. Mm-hmm. I think that there is a lot to be hopeful for, but that's also kind of like second verse, same as the first on the Louisville story. It's another year where you're like, you squint and you see a better team, and they just kind of haven't materialized.
3 straight years in 9th place. Now, ninth place in a 14-team league is better than 9th place in a 12-team league, but it isn't that much better,
Let's go forward and talk playoffs.
Let's go in the order in which these games will be played. So let's start.
I love that.
Let's start on Friday, the Amazon Prime matchup between number 1 Orlando Pride and number 8 Chicago Red Stars. Two games they played against each other, obviously, this season. The aggregate non-penalty XG differential in those games was plus 2.1 to Orlando. Very definitive performances by Orlando against Chicago, albeit a small sample, but this feels as chalk gets for this first round.
The caveat that we need to mention, as always, is that soccer is a weird sport, and teams just sometimes pull a rabbit out of their hat. And no team did that more this year than the Chicago Red Stars, a team who pulled the W out in some really improbable games. That said, based on the two teams' performances over the course of the season, I think it is hard to look at underlying numbers and say Orlando is anything other than at least the second best team in this league.
Yeah, and our good buddy, subscriber, Trevor Larner, runs his ELO projection model. He ran the model yesterday once the playoffs were set and we knew who was playing whom. And the Red Stars have a 13% chance of making it to the semifinal according to this model. So that's not nothing. But it's also the smallest percentage of any team to make it to the semifinal. So there is a non-zero chance that there will be an upset, but it is the least probable game where we will see an upset.
Yeah, and if you want me to sort of lay out the argument for why I think Chicago can do this, it has everything to do with the fact that Mal Swanson can win a game effectively on her own or with like limited help. And then sometimes shots just don't go in the net. As far as anything outside of they drag this one to penalties or they grab the odd goal and then just get real lucky white knuckling it all the way to the end, it's kind of hard to imagine another way in which Chicago sort of like resoundingly plays even Orlando even and grabs the odd goal. It's really hard to imagine Chicago outplaying Orlando. Orlando have a very complete team with a lot of talent and a lot of weapons that can hurt you and a great ability to lock you down if they grab a lead.
Yeah.
It's been encouraging to see Carson Pickett making that Orlando team's starting 11 more often. I think Seb Hines is our manager of the year. I don't want to humor Chicago winning too much. This Orlando team is very good. This Orlando team at home, I think, is very dangerous. Chicago catches a short week as well. They go Sunday to Friday. Mm-hmm. Less time to prepare for this. It's just kind of all the things
I think also
you don't want to see.
I think also something important to note is that we've said it all year that like Chicago's secret sauce is their hyper efficiency on both chance creation and chance prevention. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about XG per shot. How much XG per shot are you generating? How much XG per shot are you conceding? And the reason we have homed in on this is because they don't take a lot of shots and they give up a ton of shots. And so if you look at the sheer volume of their XG, it can seem like they're quite bad. But if you look at the per shot level, all of a sudden they look quite good. But here's the rub. Chicago are flat track bullies. When they are playing teams outside of the top 5, which is Orlando, Washington, Gotham, KC, and North Carolina, their XG per shot differential is one of the best in the league. Top 4, as a matter of fact. Their XG per shot differential when they are playing the top 5 teams themselves, again, Orlando, Washington, Gotham, KC, North Carolina, it is one of the worst in the league. And you don't get any freebies anymore. There are no more free lunches here. Like they are going to have, if somehow they make it to the final, they will have done something that no team in league history will have ever done before. Hell, if they make it to the semifinal, they will have done something that no team in league history has ever done before, which is be this.
And Evan will have ingested a lot of
so
Malort.
much Malort. I mean, I by the way, I want to say I'm modifying the Red Stars Malort challenge to say that on Friday, it doesn't even have to be a win. If Chicago scores a goal, I will do a shot of Malort.
You'll do more than that.
Oh yeah, you think Chicago's going to score a bunch of goals against Orlando?
No. What I mean is, like, I think you're taking. I think it is so unlikely. I think you got to lay like 2 or 3 shots of Malort on the line.
Absolutely not. No, I am already making concessions here.
Yeah, and I will film
this
it.
This is a really bad team when they are playing a really good team, and Orlando is a really good team. Because also, you mentioned Mallory Swanson sometimes being able to pull a rabbit out of her hat by herself. It's been really difficult for her to find good looks for herself, and without Penelope Hawking there, it's been hard for her to be a chance creator for others. And remember,
that's right.
The one person who could have done that for Chicago isn't going to be playing in this game. Ludmila is suspended. So it really is going to be the Swanson show. And Julia Grosso does not seem to be enough of a midfield progressing weapon because they are constantly under pressure. They are constantly without the ball. And Carrie Riccaro can't step up. B. Franklin can't step up. Cameron Biegalski can't step up. Hannah Anderson, Taylor Mullen. Like, this is just a very weak squad. And so once they come up against a squad of Orlando's quality and Orlando's versatility, we've been talking about Carson Pickett, but like Carson Pickett, player at left back, player at left wing. Haley McCutcheon, player at right back, player in central midfield. You know, move Angelina up and down. Maybe sometimes she's in the 10. Maybe sometimes she's in a double 6. Like, there is so much flexibility with what these players can do. You want Marta as a false 9, or do you want her as a true 10? Do you want Marta on the wing or in the middle? Like, the interchange between Banda and Adriana and Julie Doyle, or sometimes you want to play Summer Yates through the middle instead. Like, they have so many options in basically every line on every side of the pitch that, like, what the fuck is Chicago supposed to do with that?
You took the words out of my mouth as far as discussing Orlando's depth. I think this is a very clean, likely win for Orlando.
Something has to really go wrong in order for Orlando to lose this game, I think.
Yeah, again, you're talking about second best non-penalty goal differential, non-penalty XG goal differential in the league.
Yep.
You're talking about a team that finished on 60 points, but their full season X points is still 48.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, this is a good team.
Yep.
This is the second best team in the league based on underlying numbers, and the best team in the league just based on what they did in the games this season.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think this 1v8 is probably not an upset waiting to happen.
And I think also, like, just say for the sake of argument that, you know, Mal Swanson does manage to get into open space and can dribble and create something in transition. Like, Anna Morehouse is the first, second, or third best shot stopper in the league right now, depending on which model you're looking at. So you're not going to get any free looks. The reason they were such overperformers relative to their underlying stats is because Morehouse has been so good. So they even have that problem covered, because they looked a little defensively spotty over the weekend, but also, like, they really didn't give a shit.
They didn't care.
But if that were to happen, they still have a contingency plan in having one of the better goalkeepers in the NWSL. So it's just and by the way, on the other side of it, like, Alyssa Nair, who actually has been fine this year, is not of that same caliber. So Chicago can't get away with being bombarded with great shots.
Yeah. If you were looking for the sort of the fly in the ointment with Orlando, it is, since losing their perfect season, they've just been kind of unremarkable, but also they just kind of haven't played a meaningful game.
Like 3 weeks?
Yeah, in several weeks, and in real-time weeks longer than that. That said, I don't think Chicago is the team to be able to unearth these sort of narrativey vulnerabilities. Orlando clean for me.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next fixture.
Kansas City, North Carolina, Saturday morning for us, Saturday afternoon on the East Coast on CBS. 4 versus 5, you would think that this would be the closest matchup just based on seeding, but I don't think that it's actually that close.
In terms of expected points, it is the second most lopsided matchup in the playoff.
And the ELO model indeed gives the Courage only a 17% chance of creating an upset here.
That's called Russian roulette odds.
Mm-hmm.
That's one bullet,
6.
1 in 6. I personally don't play Russian roulette. I don't recommend any listener play Russian roulette. So what we are saying is, could an upset happen? Yeah, it definitely could, but North Carolina's playing with 5 bullets in the chamber, and Kansas City is playing with 1.
I take Kansas City in a walk. I mean, also, like, Caroline's knee is barking again. Like, so...
Yeah, I don't necessarily see this in a walk, but I think it's that Kansas City is the better team. I think that Kansas City at times have played some of the best soccer that this league has ever seen.
This season?
I think, yeah, this season, the Kansas City Current have played some of the best soccer
how did I hear Courage?
this league has ever seen.
Sorry. Yes.
No, the North Carolina Courage have not played some of the best. The Kansas City Current have played some of the best soccer the North Carolina Courage franchise has ever seen as well.
Yeah. Right.
But I think we're talking about an offensive juggernaut, the clear winner in non-penalty expected goals this season in terms of just like what they did and what they kept the opposition from doing. Evan has conveniently compiled some numbers. The 236 box touch differential jumps out at me. That's second best. Outrageous. We'll get to the team with the best box touch differential. Not a surprise. That said, North Carolina is not a team that has found it easy to get into the box. 5th place among playoff teams, but they're in a tier below in terms of quality in that way. I just don't think they have the attacking firepower with Caroline potentially wobbly to handle going forward against a very good and now largely solved back, like not an 80 French vulnerable back Kansas City Current line, and Alma Schultz, very solid, patchwork, but the patchwork has always been good defense.
Yeah.
So I like Kansas City to win this game. Again, it's a one-off. I'm not going to say they blow North Carolina out, but if you ask me which of these games turns into a blowout, I think maybe this is the one that I would key on.
Well, also, I mean, again, it's a small sample. It's 2 games. You got to acknowledge that. But like, of every single 2-game set of all 4 of these playoff games from the regular season, Kansas City had the largest non-penalty XG differential against their opponent. They are plus 3.4 in their 2 games against North Carolina. That is no joke. And there is a little bit, I actually was digging around and I found maybe a little bit of evidence to say that momentum might actually be a predictor of playoff success, but you have to acknowledge that it's not the results, it's not the points that you're getting in those final games of the season, it's your expected points, it's your performances in those final games of the season that seem to be the indicator. But also, you peel back another layer and you realize that the best teams who are performing at the end of the year are just the best teams all year.
That's right.
So right. You can say some team is peaking at the right time, or they're they have the momentum at their back, but they're also just the best teams, and so therefore will be more likely to win anyway. And North Carolina, other than Chicago, are bad in this field. I mean, by expected points, they are 8th or 9th. They're neutral. They're basically mid, but their XG goal differential isn't strong. They have not played well by performances in the stretch run. Whether you're looking at the final 3 games, final 5, final 8, doesn't matter. They've not played well. And if you don't have Caroline, Courtney Vine's gone on a walkabout, don't know where the hell she is. Then all of a sudden it falls to Ashley Sanchez yet again to try and pull a miracle in the attacking side of the field.
Who has had a very good season and whose name we have probably under-discussed on this pod. That said, No, she's had a good season. Ashley Sanchez does not counter the Temwa Chawinga, Dabinia, Vanessa DiBernardo, Michelle Prince, Michelle Cooper. There are just a lot of really good tools to challenge Kaylee Kurtz and friends in that back line, and a North Carolina team that in 2 fixtures this season have not figured out what to do with Kansas City. The Kansas City problem. Plus, you're doing this at California Pizza Kitchen. It's a bad time zone hop. It's a college football slot for North Carolina on the road. I just don't. There are so many things I don't like about.
What does the time zone and the college football thing have to do with it?
Oh, just because it is an early game. It is an unusual. It's an 11:30 kickoff
local time
in Kansas City.
Right.
Yeah. You only ever see morning kickoffs like Midwest college football games.
I understand what you're saying.
And so I think that there are a lot of elements here that that separate these two teams more than their table position suggests. I don't see North Carolina getting anything out of it.
And I think
again, it could happen.
And I think another team that's got a new ownership group coming in that probably needs to hit the reset button now so they can avoid what happened to Seattle and San Diego this year, because you have to acknowledge that Denise O'Sullivan is not the player she once was. I know she just re-upped recently, so that's a contract that's going to be difficult to get out from under, but you need to start making a succession plan. Even if you adjust for the volume of possession North Carolina has, she's just not making tackles and making interceptions in the way that she used to when the Courage were at their peak. And that's your engine room in a system, a tactical system that really requires a very strong on-ball presence at the 6. And that is not seemingly something that they are thinking about. Same thing with Naomi Mira. Naomi Mira is not getting any younger. And they've never really solved their forward issues beyond waiting for Caroline to come back. Because Courtney Vine, we don't know what the deal is. She's been on an excused absence basically for a month now, maybe more. And that's still only 2 attackers. You've got 4 other spots probably that you need to fill beyond Ashley Sanchez, and I'm talking about including depth pieces. There is a lot that needs to be done to this roster, especially if you don't think Monica Matsukubo is going to kick on, who has been fine, but she's still young. Is she ready to take the majority of attacking responsibility alongside Caroline? These are questions for the offseason and for Mark Lazary whenever he signs on the dotted line. But much like Seattle a year ago, much like Portland maybe this year, we're starting to see cracks show. And if they don't get filled, then North Carolina may be in for some long-term pain. And they are nowhere near small enough cracks to avoid the shellacking that's probably coming their way against Kansas City when they go on the road. This is a good place to also mention that, you said, Kansas City has played some of the best soccer the league has ever seen this year. Their non-penalty XG differential per game is tied for the second best all time behind 2018 North Carolina. They've put up Z scores, which is just a measure of how much better or worse you are than the league average in a stat. If you're +1 on Z score, you're very good. If you're +2, you're basically outstanding, potentially historically. And they put up Z scores above 2 on both XG differential and on expected points per game. They're only the 5th team in the league's history since 2016 to ever do that. And the other 4 that did it, 3 of them won titles. That's how much better they have been than basically everybody else once you peel the layers of raw results back. And it's not just offense, it's also defense. Their defense has been outstanding. Even in some of the results that maybe looked wobbly, they performed better than those raw numbers. And a lot of times, the goals that they allowed in some of those games were purely AD Franch driven and had nothing to do with tactics or with personnel.
Correct.
And now that she's gone, and now that you've got Cook and Sharples stable together, they feel, to me, pretty unstoppable. Anything can happen in 3 single elimination knockout games, but from where I'm sitting, they are the team to beat.
Moreover, from a pure tactics point of view, Sean Nahas's love of possession is not something Kansas City is uncomfortable with.
No, they actually prefer it.
Kansas City prefers to play teams that want to do what Sean Nahas's Courage do, so that they can expose and hit you on the counter.
And North Carolina refuses to adapt. They got the one way of playing, and that is exactly what they're going to do.
We talked about last week on the Patreon pod what team Kansas City would most like to face. In retrospect, I don't think we were fair enough or thoughtful enough about how good this matchup is for Kansas City.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of just like game by game, it's that 3.4 aggregate non-penalty XG over those two games. That is so thoroughly dominating. I think, again, North Carolina can win this game. We are not saying they cannot win this game. I just think Kansas City are such overwhelming favorites, and in a way that a 4 versus 5 seed doesn't actually suggest.
Exactly right. And again, 2 through 4, those seeds were decided by 1 point this season. Yeah. So they very could have easily been second, and Gotham could have very easily been fourth. It's just the way the cookie crumbled on the final weekend.
I knew that we would end up with 2 episodes this week, just because there is so much to talk about, and these first round of playoffs, this is the most fun weekend of the season, because you just get sick fixture after sick fixture after sick fixture after sick fixture.
And the first time ever that you're getting 4 playoff games in one round. Like, that's very cool.
It's very, very cool. This is a delightful weekend. We have covered the teams not in the playoffs, and we've covered the 2 first fixtures. We'll be back with a second episode showing up in your feed where we talk about Washington and Bay and Portland and Gotham.
Yeah. So we will talk to you then.
Do all the things you normally do, like subscribe.
Yeah, like, subscribe, follow, 5 stars, at XOwnGoals on social media, expectedowngoals@gmail.com. to email us with if you think we've got an own goal. Sign up for our Patreon if you haven't already. $6 a month gets you 4 bonus episodes every single month, as well as access to our Discord server and a live stream. Oh, I want you to mention this. It seems like the winds are blowing toward Gotham v Portland for live stream.
Yeah.
It feels right. It's just like, okay, you might have to risk bleeding viewers because of the NFL, but everything else is the right thing to do. As you say, we can recap the weekend. It's probably going to have more juice to it than KC North Carolina, so it makes sense. And we have a really fun Patreon bonus episode for you coming. Yes, former U.S. Women's National Team goalkeeper Jill Loyden is going to be on to talk about goalkeeping, both in the league as a whole and how goalkeepers might make a difference in the postseason. So look forward to that. And yes, we will be doing a live stream on YouTube for our subscribers on Sunday afternoon for Gotham versus Portland. So if you're a Patreon subscriber, you can join us for that. And it might be listening to whomever is going to be on the call that day. Yeah, if you want to watch me put on gloves so I don't bite my fingernails for Gotham Portland, you will enjoy. He can stay neutral until he really, really can't. Yeah, it's gonna be an exercise, but it's also like paradox for me because I definitely picked Gotham to win the league this year, and also I am from. Well, your ego can die in the face of civic pride, I think. Yeah, correct. But also, Gotham getting knocked out by Portland, probably the likeliest upset of this round. Anyway, we'll get to that on part 2. Until then, talk soon. I absolutely loved Honora. And then I saw Conclave last night, which I also liked. I've heard very strong. I haven't heard many middling reactions to Honora. I've heard very strong ones. Some people really love it. Sure. Some people really hate it. Mm-hmm. And I'm up and down with Sean Baker. Like, I love Tangerine. I don't love the Florida Project or Red Rocket the way some other people do. I love Tangerine. I think the Florida Project is good. I think I enjoyed Red Rocket. Honora is easily, for me, his best piece of work. It's not close. Wow. Okay. Fully deserving of its Palme d'Or win. One of the best final shots I've ever seen in a movie. Yeah, that's like, I keep hearing, I don't know what the final shot is, but that is something that keeps popping up in the discourse. That has just got this incredible closing moment. Yeah, and I think the closing moment is surprising and inevitable. Mm-hmm. Kind of the best 2 things you can have in a movie to arrive at the same time, which is you are unprepared for the thing that totally feels emotionally right and makes perfect sense when you play it back. I just watched Cure,
And like Cure has one of those great final shots of all time.
Masterpiece.
Total masterpiece. We're just talking really good cinema right now, actually.
Well, I can't say Enora's good cinema. I haven't seen it,
but yeah, I think Enora is. I think a byproduct of going to film school is that you just and you get this. You've done it in the academic sense. It is very hard to be surprised by a movie when you study them. You just sort of see the schematic, you see the flow of movies. And Enora, I just had no idea where we were going about an hour in. And all of the characters that could have been thinly drawn are actually like really vivid. And the movie's like laugh out loud funny many, many times over.
Yeah.
Which is also not something you're ready for.
Yeah. No, I mean,
it's just great.
The slug line is essentially, without spoiling, it's sex worker marries son of a Russian oligarch on a whim. Madcap hijinks ensue.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything for someone.
That's all I know about it. I have to assume that things don't work out between them.
It's a Cinderella. Yeah, it's a Cinderella story. My friend Becca described it, or we sort of came to the agreement. It's sort of like Pretty Woman meets Uncut Gems.
Yeah.
And like that's two really different vibes.
Yeah.
And I was there for it. There are not that many 2-hour, 20-minute movies that you never check your watch or like are even curious how far into this we are.
I read a spoiler-free article that interviewed a bunch of sex workers who watched it, and it was basically split down the middle, where half said this really represents our world as we really live it, and the other half said this really is what non-sex workers would like to think our lives are, and that sucks. And that was a pretty clean split among the half dozen 8 or 10 sex workers that were interviewed for this article. Yeah. So I can't pass judgment. I haven't seen it yet, but that's intriguing.
Yeah, my feeling is I've heard similar things from people who've worked in kitchens talking about The Bear.
Right.
And it's to say that when you're talking about an experience, the only way or like there is no global experience of a job. There is no uniformity to it. I think to the character as drawn in the movie, the experience feels lived in and authentic to that character, not necessarily to the entire world of that job.
Well, I think that my experience with Sean Baker, and this goes all the way back to like Takeout, which he made like 20 years ago, is that when he has the rhetorical dial kind of like properly locked, he's able to show you an experience or a world of existence that you may not be familiar with, but also grounds the characters in such incredible specificity that you do not walk away thinking that they are synecdoches for the broader whole of whatever they're supposed to represent. And when he doesn't have the dial locked in, then it goes the other way. And so, for example, like Tangerine feels like a movie about 4 very specific people. Not about like what the lives of black trans sex workers the world over is like. Red Rocket for me goes the other way. And then the Florida Project is the worst, where it really just feels like everybody's a symbol to me.
I agree with all of that. I think that in this film, the characters are so specifically drawn.
Yeah.
That I buy that that the Honora character is an exotic dancer from Brighton Beach with a Russian grandmother and gets entangled and ends up with this oligarch's kid only because she speaks a little Russian and he's requested it.
Uh-huh.
And like that's like that it is so specific to the character that the story begins.
Right.
That then we are trapped in this Brighton Beach world in this really fascinating way.
I mean, I can't wait to see it. I mean, Mikey Madison, who plays Honora, she played Sadie Atkins in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and has an incredibly entertaining depth.
And she was great in Better Things, the underrated FX comedy.
That's been like one of those, that and like The Good Wife are like 2 of the shows that have been on like a watch list for me for like years. And it's just with now that they
both good.
yeah. And now that each have like 5 to 6 seasons in their corpus, it just feels daunting to start. But I really do. I've always heard amazing things about Better Things.
I think I'm going to drop this entire conversation at the end of our pod.
Fun.